The market is always wrong. George Soros begins his philosophy with a statement so bold that it challenges the foundation of modern financial theory. The market is always wrong. Not sometimes, not occasionally, always. To Soros, this is not an exaggeration. It is the essential truth that separates extraordinary investors from the masses who blindly trust market signals. Markets are a mirror, but a distorted one. They do not reflect reality as it is. They reflect reality as perceived by millions of minds. Fearful minds, greedy minds, hopeful minds, confused minds. Every price is the result of human interpretation, not objective truth. And human interpretation, Soros argues, is inherently flawed. This means that every market price, no matter how authoritative it appears, is merely a temporary story the crowd is telling itself. Sometimes the story is optimistic, sometimes it is paranoid, often it is delusional, but it is rarely accurate. Soros realized early in his career that the greatest opportunities arise not when you understand the truth, but when you understand the gap between truth and perception. That gap is where chaos lives. It is where panic erupts. It is where fortunes are made and destroyed. He describes moments in the market where the crowd falls in love with a narrative. Technology will grow forever, housing will never fall, currencies are stable, interest rates will remain low. During these periods, investors stop thinking. They surrender to collective hallucination. Soros, however, watches these illusions with cold precision. He studies the psychology behind them, not the comfort they offer. What makes Soros dangerous to the market is not his intelligence, but his willingness to confront the uncomfortable. If everyone believes something is true, it is probably already wrong. He is drawn to fractures, those tiny inconsistencies that most investors dismiss as noise, a suspicious price move, a sudden shift in sentiment, a contradiction between data and market action. These small signals, invisible to the crowd, are what Soros uses to identify when perception is about to collide violently with reality. And when that collision happens, the market does not correct gently. It breaks. It snaps, it collapses into panic or explodes into euphoria. For Soros, this chaos is not danger, it is opportunity. While others search for certainty, he thrives in uncertainty. While others trust the market, he distrusts it completely. Because he knows one unshakable truth. If the market is always wrong, then the ones who recognize its lies first will always win. Reflexivity. When belief shapes reality. George Soros's theory of reflexivity is more than a financial concept. It is a direct challenge to the illusion that markets behave logically. Traditional economists cling to the belief that prices reflect underlying fundamentals, as if markets were neutral machines processing information with emotionless precision. Soros rejects this idea entirely. In his world, markets are not calculators. They are psychological battlegrounds where perceptions fight reality, and often win. Reflexivity begins with a simple but profound observation. People do not see the world as it is. They see the world as they believe it is, and those beliefs influence their actions, which in turn reshape the very world they are trying to understand. This creates a self-reinforcing loop, a dynamic cycle where expectation and outcome dance in constant tension. Consider a booming market. Investors believe prices will rise, so they buy. Prices rise, not because fundamentals improved, but because demand surged. The price increase then convinces more investors that the trend is real, causing even more buying. A narrative forms, grows, and eventually becomes accepted as truth. But it is not truth, it is collective belief masquerading as reality. Soros studies this psychological chain reaction with surgical precision. He does not ask, what are the fundamentals? He asks, how are people interpreting the fundamentals, and how will that interpretation influence their behavior? This focus on perception gives him an almost predatory advantage. While others analyze balance sheets, he analyzes human behavior, fear, greed, euphoria, denial. He watches moods shift. He observes how stories swell into movements and how movements evolve into bubbles. The thrilling part of reflexivity is that it allows Soros to detect turning points long before they appear in data. Markets are slow to admit they are wrong. People cling to comforting narratives even when cracks appear. Soros, however, thrives in those cracks. They reveal imbalance, tension, fragility, the early warning signs of dramatic reversals. He sees the market not as a static system, but as a volatile organism, constantly reshaping itself through the beliefs of those who participate in it. And because beliefs are unstable, markets are inherently unstable. Reflexivity is the heartbeat of Soros' strategy, the recognition that perception can create reality, but only temporarily. Eventually, reality fights back, and when the illusion collapses, those who understood the reflexive loop are the ones standing in the perfect position to strike. Uncertainty, flux, and the art of contrarian thinking. To George Soros, the financial market is not a structured, predictable system. It is a shifting landscape of chaos, where certainty is an illusion and stability is a temporary dream. He views markets as oceans in constant motion. Waves rise and collapse, currents shift without warning, and storms appear out of clear skies. In this environment, investors who rely on rigid predictions or comfortable assumptions are not just vulnerable, they are doomed. Soros embraces what most fear: uncertainty. He understands that uncertainty is not a weakness in the system, but the essence of the system itself. The market is always evolving, always mutating, driven by new information, rumors, emotions, and unexpected shocks. Nothing is permanent, nothing is guaranteed, nothing stays calm for long. In such a world, conventional thinking becomes a trap. The majority always clings to what feels safe, the obvious trend, the stable asset, the proven strategy. But Soros believes that the obvious is already priced in, already exploited, already emptied of opportunity. The crowd sees comfort, he sees exhaustion. This is where contrarian thinking enters, the ability to step back from the emotional noise of the market and ask, what if the majority is completely wrong? Soros thrives on contradictions. He hunts for moments when two signals conflict, when prices rise but fundamentals weaken, when optimism grows despite declining reality, when the narrative becomes too convenient. These contradictions are cracks in the market's facade, and he studies them with the intensity of a hunter tracking prey. Contrarian thinking is not about rebellion for its own sake. It is about recognizing patterns of human behavior. The crowd often becomes overconfident at the top of the market and overly fearful at the bottom. When investors panic, they sell irrationally. When they chase profits blindly, they buy recklessly. Soros positions himself opposite these emotional extremes, calm in hysteria, skeptical in euphoria. What makes his approach so compelling is that he does not simply wait for chaos to strike, he anticipates it. He senses when the market is stretched too far, when perception is inflated, when a single shock could trigger a cascade. And when the reversal comes, it is not gentle. It is violent, sudden, merciless. For Soros, uncertainty is not a threat. It is a landscape filled with hidden opportunities. The more unpredictable the environment, the more room there is for bold insight. And in a world defined by constant flux, the contrarian is not just an outsider. He is the only one truly prepared to survive. The folly of prediction. George Soros stands in direct opposition to one of the most comforting beliefs in finance, that markets can be predicted. He views the entire prediction industry, the models, the forecasts, the expert opinions, as a grand illusion built to make people feel safe in a world that is anything but safe. To Soros, prediction is not only unreliable, it is dangerous because it seduces investors into a false sense of control. The financial world loves formulas. Investors want charts that promise clarity, models that promise order, and strategies that promise certainty. Soros sees these tools as brittle structures built on shifting sand. Markets are driven by human emotions, political shocks, sudden crises, and irrational waves of fear and greed. How can anyone predict what is fundamentally unpredictable? Instead of predictions, Soros favors adaptation. He treats the market like a battlefield, dynamic, volatile, alive, and approaches it the way a portray strategist approaches war, constantly reassessing, constantly adjusting, never assuming the enemy will behave as expected. His method is simple yet brutally effective: Form a hypothesis, place a position, observe what the market does. If the market confirms the hypothesis, scale up. If it contradicts the hypothesis, abandon it instantly. This radical flexibility is what made Soros legendary. While others cling stubbornly to their forecasts, he discards his within seconds if the evidence turns. He has no emotional attachment to being right. His only loyalty is to reality as it reveals itself in real time. In moments of crisis, this adaptability becomes a weapon. When markets plunge, analysts scramble to revise predictions, clinging to old assumptions. Soros moves fast. He senses when the psychological tide has shifted, when panic is rising, when denial is breaking. He adjusts before the crowd even realizes something is wrong. And when the market enters moments of extreme distortion, times when logic disappears, Soros thrives. These moments expose a brutal truth. Prediction fails precisely when it is needed most. For Soros, the key is not forecasting the future but identifying the exact moment when your understanding becomes outdated. He turns the market into a living experiment, constantly testing, questioning, and reshaping his view. Where others seek to be right, Soros seeks to be responsive. Where others rely on certainty, he relies on agility. And in a system built on chaos, the investor who adapts fastest is the one who survives longest. Bubbles, misconceptions, and market madness. According to George Soros, every financial bubble is born from a dangerous alliance, a real trend that captures attention and a misconception that distorts it. This fusion creates a force so powerful that it can send markets soaring to unimaginable heights before unleashing catastrophic collapse. What makes bubbles terrifying is that they do not emerge from lies alone. They emerge from half-truths, amplified by collective delusion. The real trend is the spark. It may be a technological breakthrough, a change in interest rates, a new economic policy, or an innovation that genuinely transforms an industry. At first, investors respond reasonably. Prices rise slowly, cautiously. But then the misconception appears, the belief that the trend will accelerate endlessly, that growth has no limits, that risk has somehow vanished. This is when rationality begins to rot. Buyers stop analyzing, they start fantasizing. A story takes hold, simple, seductive, repeated so often it becomes doctrine. Investors repeat it with conviction, then with zeal, then with religious intensity. The bubble becomes more than a financial event, it becomes a psychological movement. Soros excels in observing this transformation. He studies not only what people say, but why they say it, the hopes, the fears, the illusions that attach themselves to rising prices. He watches how skepticism fades, how caution dies, how greed takes command. As the reflexive loop intensifies, price increases fuel belief, belief fuels more buying, and the cycle spirals upward in a frenzy of self-reinforcing optimism. But Soros knows that every bubble carries the seed of its own destruction. The higher the price climbs, the further it drifts from reality. Tension builds, quietly at first, until the slightest shock can trigger panic. It might be bad news, a subtle shift in sentiment, or even a rumor. Suddenly, the same crowd that once believed the price will rise forever now whispers, maybe it won't. Conviction cracks, doubt spreads, and the reflexive loop reverses. The fall is always faster than the rise. Optimism inflates slowly, but fear deflates violently. Investors rush for the exits, each sale accelerating the collapse. The narrative that once justified irrational buying now justifies irrational selling. Logic disappears, survival instincts take over, the market descends into chaos. For Soros, bubbles are not anomalies, they are inevitable consequences of human nature. He recognizes them early, rides them strategically, and escapes before the illusion breaks. Because he understands one universal truth, bubbles do not burst when reality changes, they burst when belief collapses.